Hope everybody's doing well today. I want to welcome everybody to the Unimpressed podcast. And today we have a friend calling in from Illinois, and he used to be in a biker gang and recently wrote a book called The Ride of My Life. I want to welcome Justin the Mooch DiLoretto to the show. How you doing, Justin?
I'm doing good. Thanks so much for having me on.
So, man, when you think about being in a gang, I don't know, I kind of look at that a little different. It's almost like a tone. And what would you say attracted you to that initially?
Yeah, I kind of grew up doing like more traditional street gang stuff. Outside of, we weren't doing like the illegal stuff for money and stuff like that. But we had weekly meetings, we had structure and leadership, we claimed area, tried to keep rivals out of our area. So I kind of had some of that experience going into the motorcycle world. But what brought me into motorcycle clubs, first and foremost, was my love for motorcycles. I fell in love with riding motorcycles. I started traveling the country with guys, spending a lot of time with guys that are, like-minded guys. And that really is what attracted me to it initially. And then I kind of got sucked in. I ended up being in for almost 15 years. So, it was a big chunk of my life.
So where were you from originally?
I grew up in Salem, Oregon, and then Portland, Oregon.
Portland, Oregon.
And then I moved around quite a bit.
You were in some type of gang growing up as a kid, or?
Yeah, so, I came from a very middle-class background. I had a really good family. Most of my family are teachers, school teachers and sports coaches. But I have an identical twin brother. And I think, it's kind of in a search for identity is the way I would probably look at it now, looking back. And I got into like punk rock and that whole music scene. And I really got into the anti-racist scene back in the day. And there was a group of like neo-Nazi skinheads in my school. And they used to bully me and pick on me. And they kept calling me a shark, which I didn't know what that was, which stands for Skinhead Against Racial Prejudice. And I didn't even know like anti-racist skinheads were a thing. I didn't know anything about it. But, being accused of it, I started looking into it or reading a lot of books about it and really kind of dove into that culture. And it really kind of emulated street gang stuff. We were, like I said, we were a group of guys with leadership, and we kept the neo-Nazi skinheads out of our neighborhood, out of our concerts, away from our scene. It was a pretty violent street gang for the most part. So I was involved in that for like my teens up until my early 20s. And from that too, it brought me into being in a band. I played guitar in a band called The Escaped, and we toured the country for about 5 years. Toured Canada, played, did some Warped tours and stuff like that. So I was pretty like already involved in kind of some street level stuff by then.
So you had some creativity, and did you ever feel some high sensibilities, creating, and how do you balance that?
At the time I was young and naive. I don't think I had much of a goal for my future. As soon as high school was done, I had no interest in college at the time. I didn't really know like what I wanted to be. And so I just kind of dove head first into this kind of music scene. And so, at the time I was just doing it. Like we were trying to put a record out. We ended up putting a couple of records out, spent a lot of time on the road. Times were a lot cheaper back then. So we could afford to be on tour for a couple months, come home for a couple months, be back on the road. We all lived together and shared a house and stuff. So I think prior to reflection, I was just kind of doing it. Looking back, it was awesome. It's something that, I could walk into a bar right now and my band's usually on Touch Tunes and on Instagram. And, I helped create and write some of those songs. And so, it's a really good feeling now as an adult. But at the time, I think I was just kind of working my way through it.
Yeah, because, when I think about being an artist and then think about being a gang member, ironically, someone that is highly creative, highly sensitive, there's a lot of people like that. And I think a lot of times we don't understand what our sensitivities are, and we somewhat mask that. We might turn to drugs, or we might turn to something else because we think we need that to balance ourselves. Do you recognize yourself as having very high sensibilities?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's probably one of the things that kind of guided me into leadership, or just kind of naturally took place where I got involved in leadership. And yeah, I was always, pretty open about talking about myself and my feelings, talking to my friends, being, one of those guys that really cared for my friends and the brothers. And so I think, yeah, that stuff naturally comes out as you get going. And I think, you kind of find your right fit.
When did you realize you could play music and write songs?
I tried learning how to play the guitar in probably junior high school, and around high school, I was just started kind of jamming around with some other guys. My stepfather played guitar, so he kind of taught me some stuff and gave me a guitar. So I had some guitar lessons early on, but I was, just like I was at the motorcycle club scene and everything, I just jumped head first before I even knew much about it. So I started playing in a band before I even knew very many chords. I was just excited to do it. So I started playing with other guys in high school, and we were doing like just high school parties and stuff like that. We didn't really start taking it seriously till shortly after high school. That's when we started like trying to put out records and touring. And, this was a time before the internet was really big. So if you wanted people to know of your band, you're putting flyers up on telephone poles, and you were traveling. You had to play concerts, and you had to be, go to LA and New York and all the little small places in between so that people knew who you were. So it was kind of a different era. So we had to work really hard to be recognized and to get our name out there.
Well, you being from from Portland. You said what, Portland, right? You're from Portland, Oregon, that area, you said originally?
Yes.
Being from that
Yes.
area, I mean, what is your lineage? What's your family? Father, grandfather?
Yeah, so both sides of my family are Italian. My great-grandparents immigrated to New Jersey from Italy, and then my grandparents came from New Jersey to Oregon to be school teachers. They finished college in Oregon and became school teachers, high school teachers. So I have a very tight-knit Italian family, and they've always been really supportive of me from day one. I think that's kind of the difference where, people look at the stereotypical gang member and say, oh yeah, he needed a family. He was missing that family atmosphere, and I actually did not have any of that. I mean, I had an amazing family. They supported me, still support me. We did Sunday dinners every weekend, celebrate all the holidays and birthdays and everything like that. So, I mean, I've been very blessed to have a very supportive family.
And what part of New Jersey is the family from?
Rahway.
Rockaway?
Rahway.
Rahway. Oh, okay. Well, believe it or not,
Yeah.
We lived in North Caldwell, New Jersey for 12 and a half years and just recently moved down back to Charleston, South Carolina, where I went to school during the pandemic. And my family actually built North Caldwell in 1951. You might know some of the last names: Soprano, Ruffalo, Jenny Antasio. So small world. And then
Wow.
I think Art Ruffalo, he built the first section in North Caldwell when he moved the family from Newark in 1951. And that was the house I lived in and rebuilt prior to moving to Charleston, South Carolina. And then in 1957, they built the second part of North Caldwell. And that's actually where they filmed The Sopranos. And David Chase, who created The Sopranos, was from North Caldwell and actually was in school around the same time as my dad. So very, very interesting deal. Your family might have knew my family. Who knows?
Yeah, that's super cool, man. It's really funny as we age, we find out how small the world is, right? Like we're not too far from knowing somebody that knows someone else, and the overlap there is pretty crazy.
Yeah. When the family came to New Jersey, what part of Italy were they from?
Campomarino and Sicily, so they were mixed between northern and southern.
So you potentially you could have been maybe in a family business if you stayed in New Jersey.
Yeah, maybe. You know what's funny is I spent a lot of time doing that kind of street level gang stuff, but I've never really been much of the hustler or like the financial part of all the benefits that people get from gang life or that type of family stuff. And that's never been a strong suit of mine, so I don't know if it would have worked out too well for me.
Well, when you talk about the sensitivities, I interviewed Rita Gigante, and her dad was Vincent the Chin Gigante, who was head of the 5 crime families in New York. And her sensibilities were very, very similar. She's a medium, she's a psychic, and as she was growing up, she didn't know, being in, with her father being this figure, she didn't know what those sensitivities were until later in life. And I think those sensitivities sometimes can take you down the wrong road if you don't really recognize what they were. She didn't know she was a medium. She didn't know she was a psychic, but you have a crime family father and then someone who's a healer and medium. It's kind of an interesting dynamic. Did you ever recognize anything like that in your life?
I think growing up in a very caring, like I said, a tight-knit Italian family, especially with school teachers and stuff, I naturally was pretty good at expressing emotions and feelings, reading other people. I've always been kind of a caring person, an empath for sure. So I think that, I recognized early on. I mean, now I'm a social worker and a therapist, so I think I probably learned those skills early on without realizing what they were, until upon reflection and being older and stuff like that. But, communication's always been a really strong suit of mine, and playing off people's strengths, keeping those around me and utilizing them for what their strengths are. I think that helped me a long way in both the worlds I kind of, were in and out of. So
interesting. So when you moved into this motorcycle gang, what were some of the things you experienced that kind of gave you a life memory where maybe I shouldn't do that again, or I'm not going to, because I think in life you learn through experience. Was there any major experiences that kind of changed your direction and mindset?
Yeah, absolutely. Joining early on, like I said, I was a young kid. I had kind of this reputation as the local tough guy. And so my first, stuff in that motorcycle club world was just trying to prove myself. I was that young kid. I was naive, and I thought I needed to show everyone that, I was the tough guy. I was an asset to the club. So I came off pretty strong, I'm sure, and was really trying to make a name for myself. Over the years, as I settled into the positions and into leadership, I tried to actually switch that and use it for a positive. So when I first started joining motorcycle clubs or coming around motorcycle clubs, all the old school guys, they would tell you, hey, if you want to join this club, you're going to lose everything. It's pretty much that old death or jail adage. And it got to the point where I was like, hey, why would I want to bring people into this club and call them my brother if it was going to be a negative impact on their life? Like, I don't want to see you join and lose your wife or lose your job. So I actually ended up using a leadership position to try and help people. I wanted people to say, when I joined the Mongols, my life got better, not everything fell apart when I joined the Mongols. So, over the years, I kind of fell into the, leadership position where I can have an influence on people. And we created some rules, like methamphetamine wasn't allowed in the regions I was in charge of. Everyone had to have full-time jobs, because if one guy gets busted selling drugs, then it's a bad look for everybody. Everyone had to work out a minimum 3 times a week, stay physically fit. And then as being a therapist and mental health counselor, my communication skills were really well. So getting the brothers to communicate and, talk more and trying to get everyone on the same page. So really, I think I took something that had a pretty negative connotations to it, and I tried to make it as positive as I could, later on in my career, my club career.
What were some of the craziest things that happened?
Well, so the first year I joined, I started the first chapter of the Mongols in Oregon, and the established clubs in Oregon didn't want us there. I'd been visited by the FBI that said there was a contract on my life, and before that had happened, I only thought that stuff happened in movies. So it was early on, I didn't take it too serious. Looking back, it was probably a pretty serious deal. So here we were, 5 or 6 guys in our 20s. For lack of a better term, we're at war with all these other local clubs that have been established in the state since the 50s and 60s. And so we had that on our plate. At the same time, nationally, the Mongols were having some issues with a major Southern California organization outside of the biker world, which we're seeing a lot of people getting killed. And then I had been arrested about 6 months after being in the club. I was following some police officers that were trespassing my property. I didn't know they were cops. And because I chased them, I got charged with attempted kidnapping and conspiracy to commit kidnapping. So I fought that case, and then I beat it. And then shortly after that, there was a large undercover investigation going on called Operation Black Rain, where they had like 3 or 4 full ATF agents that were undercover in the Mongols and arrested hundreds of people. And so that first year in the club was crazy, man. I'd been arrested. I'd seen all my friends getting busted from this major bust, and then we're fighting for our lives. I'm seeing people get killed. So I mean, it got pretty serious really quick.
So when you lay your head down at night, how did that feel? Could you get sleep at night?
Man, early on, it was a pretty stressful time. I was 25, 26 years old. I was the president of this new chapter of the Mongols. I really didn't know much about that world. I wanted to be active and be seen because I wanted to show the clubs they weren't going to push us around. But anytime we went out, we were risking getting shot off our bikes and, pretty crazy stuff. So in leadership, you have to have that face of, we're together, we're good, we're not scared. But, behind closed doors, it all kind of sinks in. I think, though, at the time, being young and kind of naive, you don't really reflect on that stuff for as serious it is until later. Because if you do, you take it pretty serious, and then you can start getting scared, you're going to start making the wrong decisions. So I don't think I reflected a lot on it at the time. I just tried my best to get through it.
Interesting. So what was the purpose of these motorcycle gangs? Like, to start a chapter and to do it, what was the sole purpose?
Well, I mean, initially the whole goal is, about motorcycles, or it should be. There's a whole generation of guys that liked the brotherhood of riding a motorcycle, kind of living out of society's rules. The guys just followed their own rules. They didn't, they don't deal with law enforcement. In the early years, the guys didn't have jobs. They just spent the time traveling around and partying. But really, by the time I joined, the big part was just, we're riding around with like-minded people, a lot of great parties, a lot of road trips. So it kind of just gave me a purpose, something to do. So, I always had an agenda. I was, had to ride to Colorado or Los Angeles, or, we were always on our bikes and had stuff going. So initially it was just pretty positive. Obviously there's a lot of negative connotations, like I said, or like you've been saying, it's often labeled a gang. And I think that's kind of debatable if it's considered a gang or not. But over the years, different clubs and different members have done pretty illegal things. And then, that's the media knows, and that's what people understand about it. But in reality, at least from my perspective, it wasn't a criminal organization. It wasn't really a gang vibe. We did have some violent altercations with other clubs, but a lot of that was personal. Once you've been in long enough and you've been tight with someone and they get killed by another club, then you hold that beef too. So it's kind of that cycle of violence, once you're in it.
Once you're in the game, once you commit to that. So how long you said you were in 15 years. When did you decide you needed to get out?
Just 2 years ago in 2021. So when I first moved to Illinois in 2017, and I initially had moved to kind of step away from the club, maybe think about retiring. I just finished graduate school. I got my master's degree in social work. I was starting to my whole emphasis was, in this new career, and I'd been doing club stuff for over 10 years at this point. And so, I was really getting into jujitsu and just kind of some other positive things. And the culture of motorcycle clubs was kind of changing, and I was just pretty burnt out. At the time, I oversaw all the Mongol chapters out of the country, and then I oversaw throughout the Northwest region and then eventually the Midwest. And so I had a lot on my plate. I stayed really active with the club and really busy. And I think I was getting really burnt out. And so I initially had moved out to Illinois to kind of just, there was no Mongols in the area at the time. I was going to step down and just, I was still going to be a member, but I wasn't going to have to be super active. And I was really trying to move on with life. But I don't know if I wasn't ready or if the timing was rough. But when I moved out here, there was a group of guys in this area that I moved to, St. Louis area, that were wanting to be Mongols, and I ended up starting a chapter there. When I moved to out here, there was one small chapter in Missouri, and by the time I retired officially, we had 4 chapters in Missouri, 2 in Illinois, 3 in Indiana. So I did a lot of growth, and I worked pretty hard on the club once I moved out here, which, like I said, wasn't my initial goal. So when things it was 2017, so around 2021, I was back to being burnt out. Politics of the club were changing a lot. The national leadership had changed a lot. One of my close friends that had joined the club in the area was murdered, and there was just a lot on my plate that made me really consider, is this something that I still believe in? Every day I put that patch on, I was risking death or jail essentially. And when it was something I believed in, that was a risk I was willing to take. And when I no longer felt supported and my life was different and these weren't the types of things I wanted to be involved in, it got harder and harder to put that patch on.
Interesting. Well, you look like an MMA fighter.
Yeah, I do Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu.
You look like you could go a little bit.
Yeah, I grew up wrestling, and then I did a little bit of boxing in my early 20s. And then I really didn't do a lot of sports, because I was so active in club stuff. And when I started getting into working out quite a bit, and then from there I got into jiu-jitsu, and I've been doing jiu-jitsu for 6 years.
Huh. Well, I can relate to getting burnt out, because I think when you deal with extreme personalities, you do that over and over and over. I really think that extreme personalities can weigh on someone that has high sensibilities. Do you think that's what got to you, just kind of mentally exhausted you?
Yeah, absolutely. Like I said, I was in charge of a lot of areas. So, any chapters that were having issues or internal conflicts, they would have to come to me to help mediate. And so there was just a lot on my plate that, was a lot of things I wasn't into anymore, and so dealing with that type of drama, when we started in Chicago, the major club here, the Outlaws, said that we are in Illinois, they said we couldn't be here. So we were back to beefing with these other motorcycle clubs and the people were getting killed. And when people get killed because of decisions that you've made or didn't make, that hits you pretty hard. It's pretty heavy. Like when people don't understand, a lot of people want to be in leadership or say they're a leader, but when you're actually doing it, you got to really understand the consequences of choices you make, and it has real life implications on people. So, that was really draining to me once it really hit me that, some choices I made possibly led to somebody's death, a close friend's. The burnout was definitely real, and it just, you're right, it became exhausting. And especially when, you're worried about your safety. This was the second time I got visited by this time was local law enforcement about a contract on my life because the local club didn't want us here. So you're everywhere you go, you're on high security, high alert. So there's that stress. There's the stress of just the internal drama, and then club politics in general. Right around this time, our national president had been kicked out of the club, and a lot of people were jockeying for positions, and there was a pretty big power struggle. And I'm sure, you've seen that from crime families to anywhere, that when that happens, it's never good. And so there was just so much stress and drama going on that it was definitely very burnt out.
So The Ride of My Life, the book, what do you hope to accomplish with your story?
So that's a good question. I really hope to just share my story with other people, people like yourself that can get a glimpse into what motorcycle clubs were about or what that lifestyle is like, but also for people in that club life that are wanting to step away, make a better life for themselves. Like I said, I end up becoming a social worker and a mental health therapist. I work with teens that are on parole or probation and try and help, keep kids out of the juvenile justice system. So it's kind of more of a positive story, right? About redemption and, staying true to who you are as a person and really trying to make those positive changes. And even in the club life, I talk about it in the book, like I brought up earlier, if you're in a position of leadership or a position of control and you have people around you care about, it's your opportunity and it's your chance to really try and help better these people around you, like being a positive brother or a positive friend, be that positive role model. So I really hope it's just kind of empowering to others to try and look after those they care about and just be the best version of themselves that they can be.
When you approach some of these kids to talk to them and they have issues or in juvie or whatever it is, what's your approach?
Well, I think my appearance helps a lot right out the gate, right? I go and meet with these teenagers. I think they're used to dealing with, the traditional therapist or what you would think of a traditional therapist. A big rule in therapy is I don't share my past, right? It has nothing to do with me. It's about the client. But you can look at me and read that I've probably been through some stuff. I probably understand what you're going through. There's a lot of empathy there, but I'm also not going to put up with your shit, right? Like you're not going to BS me. And so I think there's a lot at play that where the youth can really, align with me and we can build that therapeutic rapport pretty early on because I know I'm not BSing them.
Now, do you have wife, kids, family?
I do have a wife and we've got 3 rescue dogs, no kids for us, but I have an identical twin brother, and I have a niece and nephew. And then I have my little brother died when he was 11, and so my parents had another child a few years later. So I have a young sister. She just turned 19. That's in college. So I feel like I kind of have kids, but I get to give them back.
Nice. And how'd you meet your wife?
She was actually a bartender at one of the bars that we rode into as a club one time. And I was going through a breakup, so I was just single for about a year and just openly dating. And I guess she sent me a friend's request on Facebook after seeing me at the bar, and I honestly didn't remember it. And several months later, she liked a photo, and I was like, well, who's this hot chick liking my photo? And I invited her out, and we started hanging out, and then we clicked really, really early on. And it was one of those things where I realized why the other relationships in my life didn't work out once I found the right one. Like it really clicked to me what this is how relationships are supposed to be. Being a therapist, we have excellent communication. She's about 10 years younger than me, so she kind of keeps me young. She's a lot more outgoing than me, and a lot more active. But we share a lot of the same stuff. We're both into rescuing animals. We're both into fitness. She works out often, so she helps keep me motivated to go to the gym. So it's been a really good partnership outside of a really good friendship.
Awesome. So if we want to find the book, Ride of My Life, and you can hold that book up if you want to show the book, and tell us where we get the book.
So it's available from all major retailers. I think the easiest is probably Amazon or Barnes & Noble. We've been trying to push most of them through Amazon right now because they keep track of like the rankings, and the more that they sell through Amazon, the more Amazon helps promote it. So Amazon's been the best way. They've got hardback, paperback, and the digital version. I'm going to go into the studio pretty soon and start recording the audiobook, but I heard that takes a while, so I wouldn't hold my breath that that's going to be out soon, but we are working on the audiobook for it too.
And what do you think the best story is in the book?
Man, I think the overall kind of redemption of it towards the end, early on, it's talking about, my life and my childhood and touring in the band. It kind of jumps around a little bit, and that's been some positive and some negative feedback about that. But when you read the book, I want people that know me to hear my voice. I want them to say, I'm a natural storyteller. When we're at parties and hanging out, I'm usually the guy telling jokes and telling stories. And so I really wanted this book to convey this was me sitting down, sharing a story. So, it jumps around a little bit. There's a lot of humor in it, laughing, but then a lot of serious stuff, emotions and feelings and stuff that I don't think people think that bikers talk about. And my biggest takeaway to it is the last couple chapters where I really decide that club culture has changed, club life has changed, and it would have been really selfish of me to try and hang on to something that was no longer there. And I chose to move on. And since I've moved on, it's really bettered my life. It's bettered my wife's life, my family. It's kept me out of danger. I'm not worried about law enforcement and, other clubs. And so it's been, kind of a big weight off my shoulders. And I think, I kind of wrap it up by saying I don't regret any of my time in that club life because it made me who I am today. I'm not proud of some of the things I've done over the years between gang life and club life. And we could kind of take that for what it's worth. But as I grew as an adult and as a human, and my empathy got, stronger, and world experience and everything else, I think I really learned who I am as a person. And I think a lot of these stories and stuff I went through really shaped me. And so there's not a lot I would change either. Like, I had a good time doing it, but it was time to leave.
Well, I think it comes down to respect and value. I don't think a lot of people today give themselves any value. They don't respect a brand or authority, or, I don't know what it is. It seems like there's not much respect for life in general. Unfortunately, I think that deteriorates, a lot of things, that could be foundational or used to be foundational.
Yeah. So, I think generationally back in the day, people had a lot of pride in their work or their family or their friend group, something they belonged to. There was a lot of pride in that, and you put a lot of hard work into that, and you wanted it to reflect, in who you are as a person. And I think generationally now, like you said, I think there's, a lot of people don't respect traditions and values that we used to. And I also think, I don't know if it's social media or what, but people are more concerned with image. So, in my era in that club world and gang stuff too, the people that became leaders was because they were good at the job. Where now people want to be leaders to say, I'm a leader. They want the title, not necessarily the work that goes with it. And so I think that inherently changed, club life and a lot of other things is, people no longer have that respect for the position or for authority or for the rule, or for the tradition of why we were doing these things. And it kind of, people have gotten a lot more selfish, and they care about how is it going to affect me, not how is it going to affect everybody. And I think that really kind of undermined the brotherhood of all that.
Well, unfortunately, and this is something I've been on, is that, they can thank technology for that, because I think based on what we take in on a daily basis, and we can take in a lot of information very quickly without any, work doing it. I think that devalues society in a way, unfortunately. And if you're listening to this, I think you should really think about that, because I think if you strive for something that's foundational, it gives you more pride, it gives you more respect, and I think it enriches your life more. But people are going the opposite direction. So maybe we'll get back to that one day.
Yeah, I think there's a strong sense of pride in anything you've had to work hard for, right? Like you said, if it took you a while to build something or to learn something, you're very invested in it, then, there's a lot of pride that comes with that. And then you're kind of bought into it. But if it's something that you can just look up really quick, or, you hear some real quick slips and you think you're an expert, you're not really that bought into it. And I think that kind of, waters down your stance and like, again, the way people, what they stand for and what they believe in.
Well, I think it's been a good conversation. I hopefully people can learn something from this conversation. I mean, I think things are somewhat linear no matter what you do in life. If you give things respect, if you think about foundation, there's that level and process and pretty much everything. I think we got to get back to that. And it's very, very interesting. And hopefully, like I said, people can learn something from this. And Justin, I appreciate you coming on the show. And I don't know if there's anything else that we didn't touch on that you want to speak about.
So, as being a therapist and trying to, have that positive mindset, I do, I have a social media, Instagram, it's OG__Mooch. I answer anyone that messages me. Obviously, I've got to set some boundaries, but if anyone reaches out or needs a word of encouragement or help, just hit me up on social media. I'm happy to help. If you're going through something similar that I went through and you need, some advice, hit me up. I'm always happy to help.
Awesome. All right, cool, man. Well, Justin, the Mooch de Loreto, appreciate you coming on the show, and check out his book, The Ride of My Life. And my name's John Edmonds Cosma, the CEO of Bang Productions. Thank you.